This is the Whirly Bird Productions podcast. I'm your host, Amber Williams. I discuss film finance and distribution with filmmakers and entertainment lawyers. In this episode, I sat down with Farah Abushwesha, a London-based BAFTA-nominated producer, owner of Rockcliffe Productions and creator of the BAFTA Rockcliffe New Writing Competition and Showcase for Emerging Talent. She was a Screen International Star of Tomorrow and was named an American Academy Gold Fellowship for Women finalist in 2021. She has made comedy content used by the White House, the Netflix original Irreplaceable You, and her short film The Party was an Irish Film Board commission to celebrate the centenary of the 1916 Easter Rising. This film won her BAFTA nomination. She has also been nominated for a European Film Award and the Champion for New Screen Talent. She has lectured in Dubai, Dublin, Libya, London, San Diego, New York and Johannesburg. Farah's television credits include The Singapore Grip, The ABC Murders and the four-part ITV drama No Return. Her most recent work is her forthcoming feature film Woken. Farah has written 2 books, Rockcliffe Notes, A Professional Approach for Screenwriters and Writer-Directors, and Rockcliffe Notes, A Guide to Low-Budget Filmmaking, which you can find links to in the show notes. Farah, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hello. Thank you. Hello.
So can you tell us a bit about your new film, Woken?
So Woken is a film that's written and directed by Alan Friel, who I made a short film called Cake with, and Alan and I have been long-time collaborators. It was actually a film that Fantastic Films in Ireland set up and got the funding for, and they brought me in to kind of work with Alan on a kind of as the producer that he could talk to, and because of our long-standing relationship. So it was very much a kind of creative co-producer role with him. And actually it was a joy because I didn't have to worry about kind of the financing, the completion, but similarly for those producers as well. You know, the first week of shooting, Alan got COVID, the line producer got COVID. So I was able to go down to the set and be there as they were doing sort of all the funding and the completion and getting that sorted. But it's been a real joy to work with him and them and the Italian co-producers as well. So it's a kind of grounded sci-fi. Alan's a very versatile writer-director, and that's what I love about him. It's kind of set in a remote kind of island, and a young woman, she wakes up pregnant and she's had an accident and has no memory of her past. And it stars Erin Kellyman, Maxine Peake, who we collaborated with on Cake, and Peter MacDonald, who I also kind of went to sort of school with. He was in a boys' school that kind of collaborated with my girls' schools, but he still remembered me from back then, which was quite funny. as things, nice. Yeah. So that was a real sort of joy, filming in the west of Ireland in an area that I used to go to for my summer holidays. That we filmed in a friend's house, my mum's friend's house, which was, it was like going back sort of 35 years and nothing had changed.
When's it being released? Because it's still in post-production, is that right?
Literally just delivered it. So Bankside are handling its kind of release. So it'll probably look for its festival. And then we literally are just still just signing off on the final sort of grade and stuff, but it is pretty much there. So Bankside will be handling, our sales company will be handling its release and where it goes to and out into the world. We all can't wait. It's very exciting times.
And so how did the partnership with Bankside come about? Did they approach you? How did it work with Bankside?
I'm good, I'm good friends with Stephen Kelleher and Sophie Green, and have been for many, many years. And it was actually at my leaving party. And they've also worked with Fantastic on several films as well. I had a leaving due because I was going off to film in Malaysia for what I thought was 6 months. It ended up being 10. And Alan was there, Stephen was there, and I think they just talked about the film, and then Bankside approached Fantastic and they really liked what it was. They like Alan. And I think that it's really important to know that a lot of these things are to do with connections and rapport as well as the actual product itself. Because I think that when you start to meet people and get to know their sensibility, it kind of really, it's a shorthand. It doesn't mean somebody will take things. It just means that there's a shorthand. But yeah, I think that's where they were introduced. But yeah, they've worked with fantastic and quite a few films over the years.
Okay, and generally, when you fund a film in the UK, is there a kind of certain path that you've learnt to follow, like a certain strategy, how you approach it?
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a really good question. There are many ways to, I'm not going to say skin a cat because I've got there are many ways to do it. You know, I've worked on films where it's been private equity with tax credit, but generally how I start is I do an application to the BFI, and then Film 4 and BBC Films, depending on what the project is. And like, you know, I just find it's for me, that's the kind of best way to kind of approach how you start with those, and then you kind of keep going till you exhaust all the other avenues, but you start with those funding schemes. And I have producing partners in Ireland, so we'll apply for Screen Ireland funding as well. So being Irish, I'm able to kind of tap into both. I don't have an Irish company at the moment because I work with Underground Films on certain projects. But yes, we're looking at all the funding deadlines. We're looking at, you know, where all the kind of the funders are, and I start from there. And actually the feedback on those things is really good because it gives you a good idea of how to gauge it. I also go out to sales agents and, you know, and see what their thoughts are. And I get industry professionals to kind of have a read of the script and tell me where they feel it lies in terms of kind of sales estimates. And that's just a very informal thing as well. So I know what to budget it for. I know what kind of scale of cast I need to bring on board. But it's like a chicken and egg. It's like you just keep plugging away at everything until something sticks. And no film is the same. So you need to know that there's an audience and a festival strategy, like, and that starts with the genre. So for me, every single film, I will talk to sales agents about in an informal way, get their gauge on the project, what it is, what kind of returns sales estimates they're talking about. So I know what kind of budget range to budget it at, and whether it has a marketability, and getting their feedback upon it, and then improving the script if that's what needs to be done. But I think you need to know who you're making the film for. So, you know, Woken is a grounded sci-fi horror. That's got a very specific audience, but it also does very well on the festival circuit. But it also does, you know, certain kinds of releases. So, you know, we know what that film is, and we know how the film is going to get out there, and what kind of audiences it's going to attract. And the sales agents know that too. So they know who their distributors are that they're going to go to. But I also have great trust in Bankside as well, because I've known them for years and I know their track record. It's all about research. You have to do your homework. As filmmakers, you need to look at who you're getting into bed with, number one. You know, you need to look at who you're giving your IP away to. You need to get a really good lawyer to go through those deals, who've done those deals, and not try and penny pinch at this point, and see where it is. Talk to other filmmakers about their experiences with that sales company. So all of these things kind of make up how I approach a film, and, you know, and how I'm going to deal with it. It's one thing to make your first film, but it's another thing to make a series of films over the years. And I do go between film and TV, because one gives me a very, a great living that is less stressful. I have been living off, you know, in my early days, you know, 15, 20 grand a year. That was doable back when I was starting. It's not doable now. You know, there's a cat to be fed. But, you know, there are all these things to take into consideration. And, you know, we have to be more and more savvy. I think that's great. But I think you also have to look at it, you know, sometimes the film that we set out to make is not the film that we end up making, you know, for so many reasons. the performances don't quite hit it, or you didn't get the cast that you thought you wanted. So you got the cast that you could get who couldn't quite get to that, point. And, maybe the editor wasn't as great as, or maybe the cinematographer let you down, or maybe it rained the entire time. There's so many things that can go wrong to a film not being as great and reaching its full potential. And so many of those things. So yes, people get caught up in the creative, but I'm already looking at that audience, that those bums in the seats from the minute that I get a script in my hand. What is this? Is it following the genre? What's the market of this? What's the festival? And you need festivals to get the reviews, to get that buzz around the film that, that I was talking about, the silent scream, or the silent cheers rather. You do think less so on platforms, because platforms are their own marketing, they have their own audiences, but certainly with the smaller indie films. And, you see After Sun and how brilliantly that's done. It really excites. And A Quiet Girl, these are fantastic films.
Mm. So that's having distribution in mind, right from the start.
Yeah, I did some, Mia Bays used to do courses on, distribution and sales and marketing for films. And I and many other producers have attended them, and watched them. And it's knowing that the market constantly changes. And it's relationships with sales agents and, different sales agents, again, doing your research, knowing what it is that Altitude do, knowing what it is that Bankside do, knowing what it is that Independent do, knowing what it is that companies like Trinity do, looking at who are these sales and distribution companies and how do they work, A24. And you do have to do your homework, it's the cost of business, your time, but it does pay off.
Yeah. Research always does pay off.
Research always does pay off.
Is the P&A budget already decided in with the contract?
Personally, I would say don't defer your fees up front. Take what it is. Very few people make money from the back end of a film.
Yeah.
I am one of the few because, we sold Irreplaceable You to Netflix. So we made money on that. But, I haven't seen much money, and nor have many other people, on the films that we've made to date. So you make sure that you don't defer your fees up front. You give yourself, a healthy producer fee and a healthy and a reasonable company overhead fee. And then you let your film go out there, and what happens. There is no science or rhyme or reason or kind of formula for, what happens at the other end.
And I want to talk about Irreplaceable You. So you shot that in the States, didn't you, in New York City?
Yes.
What kind of visa did you go over there? What kind of working visa did you get to go over there with?
I've always had, being Irish and being Libyan, I've always needed to have a B1, B2 visa, so I can go for business and for pleasure. Yeah. With regards, so I had the O1. So as soon as we were fully financed, I was granted an O1 visa, so the extraordinary talent visa.
Okay. Was there a limit to how long you could stay on that?
I think it's a 2-year visa. I think it's valid for 2 years to that project. So it's project by project.
How long was the shoot?
The shoot was about 5 weeks.
Okay. Wow. Okay. That was quick.
Very quick shoot. Yeah. Well, we'd cast availability issues, so there was hard outs on that.
Yeah. Were you involved in getting the funding together for that?
Yes.
But yes, you were.
Yeah.
And so
I'm literally from start to finish.
Wow. Okay. So the budget for that was 10 million, is that right?
I'm not saying.
Okay, that's fine. Can you tell me where you got the budget, where the funding came from?
So we went with the sales agency. So that was the first thing I did with that, because we had cast attached at that point, was I went out to about 3 different sales agents and finance companies in the US. And it was very different for me. I'd not worked in the US before. I don't know. I did actually. No, I worked on a kind of Atlas 4D, which is like a Planet Earth type show in Hawaii. So that was pretty much it. And then I went out to everybody. I remember it was just before the Galway Film Festival, and literally offers came in on the table within about a week of sending out those emails. And I just couldn't believe it, which is incredible for the director and the writer myself. And then we found private equity partners, because that's how it works out there, and which were introduced to us via the sales agency. And then they came on board, and then Netflix bought the film. I think it was about a week before we shot, based on the casting that we had. And yeah, I mean, at that time we didn't really know what a Netflix deal was, but it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. Yeah. And it just was like a domino effect. It just, it felt very long, but it was only 6 months between sending it out and having it financed and shooting. So.
And if Netflix hadn't come along, what would you have been looking to do with the film?
Oh, we would have probably done the festival route, or route, as the Americans would have said, and then hope for territory sales, which the exchange would have looked after.
Okay.
But as it was, 16 million people at least watched it. It was one of the most watched movies in Latin America and Latin-speaking countries. Did pretty well in the world and stuff. And people were going that it was the saddest movie on Netflix, and were filming themselves crying watching it, which is really, really different.
Yeah.
To what, because I mean, we didn't know when platforms were quite new at that point. And certainly the reactions to platforms were quite new. So that was a kind of really interesting thing to go through. And also it was like this silent scream, of all these people talking about it online, but not having any of the kind of, we had a great premiere in New York with cast and crew screening. But there wasn't that same kind of build-up that you get from seeing something in the cinema, taking your friends to see it in the cinema, going to festivals, interacting with audiences, that way that I was used to it. But this was it was everywhere. There were billboards of it. And I just remember driving through New York and seeing a billboard of it, and driving in LA, a few days later and seeing, and I remember just crying, going, oh my God,
wow,
that's our film. And, I'd never experienced anything like that before.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. A poster at a film festival had been it.
Yeah. And what's next? You're working in television now, aren't you?
I know, I cross over between film and TV.
Yeah. You must be very busy. You work on them simultaneously. That's a good question. How do you manage your time? Because I'm constantly swapping between, I don't think I've found, I guess there isn't really a fine balance, because projects are constantly changing, aren't they?
If I'm in production on a TV show, that's all consuming. So I tend to bring in somebody as a development exec to kind of keep things moving, forward. I've always managed to juggle. I think it comes from a discipline of being at drama school and training there. You'd be in 3 or 4 different things at any given time, and you had to know your lines for all of them, and you had to be present for all of them. And I think it's the pain of discipline to some extent. I used to kind of party as hard as I worked, but in my older years I've got better at kind of having that balance. And again, I think the pandemic really helped kind of in ways to slow down, although I did get COVID in March 2020, so that was pretty unpleasant.
Yeah.
Quite long-term effects on my health. But yeah, you find a way to do things. I mean, now I would say that I'm probably juggling less. It's easier now when I'm not on a film job to kind of develop projects, but they take so long to get through. I mean, you do an application, it's 8 to 10 weeks before you hear back.
Yeah.
Draft of a script or a redraft, it's like 6 to 8 weeks before the writer gets back to you with the new draft. And then if they're delayed, that's a knock-on effect. But what I have done is I've streamed back a lot of my projects because I think the market has changed in the last few years. And I think I can safely say that I'm concentrating more on my personal life. Having said that, on Monday, my producing partner and I literally worked from dawn until dusk, on a Fundome project. And somebody said to me, have you actually left the house today? And I went, oh, I had a pot of coffee and 2 apples. It's like, I'll just treat it as a fasting day. So yeah, so you do those kind of things, but I think there's bringing in a healthy work-life balance, the semi-continuous working days, so you're working more intensely. I also bring in the Pomodoro technique, where you work intensely you sprint work. So I'll do 30 to 45 minutes of deep focus, and then I'll do 15 minutes of kind of rest. And that will be pottering out, playing with the cat, making a cup of tea, having a call, maybe chatting to my mom, and getting away from the screen, and then I'll start again. And that's become a really good way for me to do stuff. Like I used to, even on, some of the films I worked on, I wrote those 2 books during productions. So I say wrote, I mean, I interviewed a whole load of people before we were in production, and then I kind of worked on finessing them in the layout. So, but I am proud that I've got those books down in writing, because for me, what was really important was that having the access to information and how to do stuff is a real big kind of, it's really important to me to help the next generation, because there were people that really helped me and people that didn't. And so I put down everything I knew into those books, and then interviewed other people and asked them to share their knowledge of stuff. And I think that's really important, that those practical, street wisdom that we need, that's not always available to us.
Yeah.
Sharing with people.
Exactly. And that's what you're here doing today, sharing your knowledge with us. So
I'm a Magnus.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right.